Jake Donovan dragged himself up the stairs of his apartment building, his body aching from a 12-hour shift that had stretched past midnight. All he wanted was silence and sleep. But when he opened his door, he froze. A woman knelt on his kitchen floor, scrubbing the tiles with her bare hands. Blonde hair, expensive clothes now stained with dirty water. She turned around. Jake recognized that face instantly from company posters, from emails he never read past the signature line. Lara Wilson, the CEO of Wilson Enterprises, and she was cleaning his house. Earlier that evening, Jake had been stacking boxes in the warehouse like he did every night, his shoulders burning from the repetitive motion. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. His co-worker had called in sick, which meant Jake was handling two people's work alone. "You got this right?" his shift supervisor had said, barely looking up from his clipboard. "You always figure it out." Jake had just nodded. He always nodded. 8 years at Wilson Enterprises, and that sentence had become the soundtrack of his life. "You always figure it out. Translation, we can dump anything on you because you won't complain." By 11:30, his hands were raw and his back screamed with every movement. But the shipment had to go out by midnight, so Jake kept moving, kept lifting, kept pushing through the pain like he'd done 1,000 times before. When he finally clocked out, the parking lot was empty, except for his beat-up Honda, a car he'd bought used 6 years ago, and nursed back to health more times than he could count. The engine coughed twice before starting another repair he couldn't afford, but would have to make anyway. On the bus ride home, because the Honda was for emergencies only and gas cost money he didn't have, Jake stared at his phone. A text from Mrs. Johnson, his elderly neighbor who watched Lily when he worked late. She asked why you're always tired. I didn't know what to say. Jake's thumb hovered over the keyboard, but nothing came. What could he say? That her daddy worked himself to the bone just to keep the lights on. That sometimes love meant absence, because presence required money he didn't have. He put the phone away without responding. The apartment building loomed ahead, a 5-story brick structure that had seen better days, sometime around the 1980s. Jake climbed the stairs slowly, his legs heavy with exhaustion. All he wanted was to check on Lily, collapse into bed, and do it all over again tomorrow. He never expected to find his CEO on her knees in his kitchen. For a long moment, Jake couldn't process what he was seeing. Lara Wilson, the woman whose signature appeared on every company memo, whose face graced the annual report he'd never bothered to read, was scrubbing his floor with a sponge. Her designer blouse was wrinkled, the sleeves rolled up past her elbows. A bucket of dirty water sat beside her. "What?" Jake's voice came out strangled. His first instinct, honed by years of being black in corporate America, was fear. "What's happening? Did I do something wrong?" Lara looked up, and Jake saw something he didn't expect in her eyes. Not pity. Not the cold detachment of a boss delivering bad news. Something that looked almost like shame. "Mr. Donovan." She rose to her feet, wiping her hands on her already ruined pants. "I'm sorry for intruding. Mrs. Johnson let me in after I showed her my company ID and explained who I was. I know this seems insane. Is Lily okay?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them. Nothing else mattered. "She's fine. She's asleep. I checked on her." Lara gestured toward the small bedroom down the hall. "This isn't about her. It's about you." Jake felt his defenses rise. In his experience, when powerful white people said, "This is about you," to a black man, nothing good followed. He glanced toward Lily's room, calculating how quickly he could get his daughter and leave if this went sideways. "I'm not here to fire you," Lara said, reading his expression. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because I owe you an apology that words alone can't express." She reached for something on his kitchen counter, a worn leather notebook, its pages yellowed with age. Jake didn't recognize it. "My father passed away 3 months ago," Lara continued. "When I was going through his things, I found this. He kept it for decades, notes about the company, about employees he met during facility visits. She opened the notebook to a page marked with a small yellow tab. Your name appears 17 times. Jake stared at her, uncomprehending. The founder of Wilson Enterprises had known his name. Lara read aloud. Jake Donovan, Warehouse Operations. Works harder than anyone on his shift. Never complains. Never misses a day. She flipped forward a few pages. Another entry 2 years later asked Marcus why Donovan hasn't been promoted. He said Jake prefers his current position. I don't believe him, but I didn't push. The name Marcus hit Jake like a physical blow. Marcus Reed, the chief operating officer, who had taken over warehouse oversight 6 years ago. Before Marcus, Jake had been just another worker in a big company, invisible, but not actively held back. Everything changed when Marcus arrived. There are more entries, Lara said quietly, spanning the last 6 years ever since Marcus took charge of operations. My father noticed you. He wrote about how you deserved better, and he did nothing about it. Her voice cracked slightly. And neither did I, because I didn't even know you existed until I read this notebook. Jake's mind was reeling. I don't understand. Why are you here? Why are you... He gestured at the bucket, the sponge, his humble kitchen, that suddenly felt even smaller with her in it. Lara set the notebook down. After I read my father's notes, I pulled your personnel file. I talked to people in your department, people who actually work alongside you, not the managers. Do you know what I found? Jake shook his head slowly. You've been passed over for promotion 4 times since Marcus took over. Every single time he told HR you weren't interested or weren't qualified. He never once asked you. He never gave you a chance to apply. Lara's jaw tightened. You're not failing, Mr. Donovan. You're being buried, deliberately, because you're too good at your job, and promoting you would mean Marcus loses his most reliable worker. The words hung in the air between them. Jake felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been locked away for so long he'd forgotten it existed. Anger, pure white-hot anger. But underneath the anger was something worse, shame, because part of him had always believed he wasn't good enough, that if he just worked harder, stayed later, complained less, eventually someone would notice. Eventually he'd get his chance. He'd been waiting for a chance that was never going to come. You still haven't answered my question. Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Why are you cleaning my house? Lara looked around the small apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the second-hand furniture, the refrigerator that hummed too loudly. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. Because I couldn't think of any other way to show you that I'm not here as your CEO. I'm not here to give you a speech about company values or hand you a check to make myself feel better. She met his eyes directly. You've worked for my company for 8 years. You've given us everything, and this is what you have to show for it. This apartment, this life. While Marcus takes credit for your work and my shareholders collect dividends built on your back. She picked up the sponge again, then set it down as if unsure whether to continue. I can't undo years of injustice with one night of cleaning. I know that. But I needed you to see that I understand what was taken from you. Not just money or promotions, but dignity. The belief that if you worked hard enough, you'd get ahead. Lara's voice dropped. That belief was stolen from you. And the company my father built, the company I run, was the thief. Jake stood frozen in his own kitchen, this woman's words washing over him like waves he couldn't stop. His whole life he'd told himself that silence was strength, that endurance was victory, that if he just kept his head down and did his job, things would work out. Now he was learning that his silence had been the cage they built around him. What do you want from me? He finally asked. Lara shook her head. Nothing. Not tonight. Tonight I just needed you to know the truth. What happens next, that's your choice, not mine. She gathered her things quietly, the notebook, her purse, the dignity she'd stripped away from herself by kneeling on a stranger's floor. At the door, she turned back. My father wrote one last thing about you, Mr. Donovan, the final entry before he got too sick to write. She recited from memory. Jake Donovan deserves more than we've given him. I hope someone fixes this before it's too late. She opened the door. I'm going to try to be that someone, if you'll let me. Then she was gone, leaving Jake alone with a truth that threatened to shatter everything he thought he knew about himself. Jake didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table long after Lara left, staring at the photocopied pages she'd given him, excerpts from her father's notebook, the ones with his name. 17 mentions over 6 years. 17 times the founder of the company had noticed him, wondered about him, and ultimately done nothing. The anger Jake had felt earlier had faded into something more complicated. His whole adult life he'd built his identity around a simple belief: work hard, stay quiet, and eventually you'll be rewarded. That belief had gotten him through his wife's death 4 years ago. It had kept him going when he came home exhausted to a daughter who barely recognized him anymore. It had been his armor against a world that seemed designed to break men who looked like him. Now that armor lay shattered on his kitchen floor, and Jake didn't know who he was without it. Part of him wanted to dismiss everything Lara had said. Rich people always had angles. Maybe this was some elaborate PR stunt, the white CEO, saving the poor black worker a story she could tell at charity galas. Maybe she was just trying to ease her own guilt about inheriting a fortune built on exploitation. But another part of him, the part that had spent years wondering why he never got ahead, knew the truth when he heard it. He'd been buried, deliberately, and he'd helped dig his own grave by never questioning why. The next morning, Jake went to work like always, but everything felt different. He watched Marcus Reed stride through the warehouse during his morning inspection that practiced smile on his face, shaking hands with workers he'd never bothered to learn the names of. Jake had always seen Marcus as distant, but fair, a busy executive with more important things to worry about than warehouse operations. Now, he saw something else. The way Marcus's eyes slid past him without acknowledgement. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes when he talked to the black and brown workers. The way he lingered longer with the white supervisors, clapping them on the back like old friends. Had it always been this obvious? Or had Jake trained himself not to see it? During his lunch break, Jake sat alone in the break room, turning Lara's words over in his mind. A younger worker named Deshawn dropped into the seat across from him, a kid barely out of high school, eager and optimistic in a way that made Jake's chest ache. "Hey, Mr. D, you okay?" "You look like you didn't sleep." Jake forced a smile. "Just tired. Long shift last night." Deshawn nodded sympathetically. "I feel you. Hey, did you hear about the supervisor position opening up? I was thinking about applying. You think I got a shot?" The question hit Jake like a punch to the gut. He saw himself in Deshawn Young, hopeful, believing that hard work would be enough. He wanted to warn the kid, to tell him the game was rigged. But what would that accomplish? Crushing someone else's hope wouldn't restore his own. "You should apply," Jake said finally. "You're a hard worker. You deserve a shot." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. A week passed. Jake kept his head down and did his job, but the knowledge Lara had given him festered like an open wound. Every time he saw Marcus, every time he watched another promotion go to someone with less experience and lighter skin, the anger burned hotter. Then Lara came back. This time she called ahead, asking if she could visit after Jake got home from his shift. He almost said no. But something, curiosity maybe, or the desperate hope that she might actually mean what she'd said, made him agree. When he opened the door, Lily was already awake, coloring at the kitchen table. Mrs. Johnson had brought her back early because she had a doctor's appointment. Jake hadn't had time to prepare his daughter for a visitor, let alone explain who Lara Wilson was. "Daddy!" Lily bounced up from her chair, her braids swinging. "There's a lady here!" Lara stood awkwardly in the doorway, clearly unsure how to proceed. She wore simpler clothes this time, jeans and a plain sweater, as if trying to make herself smaller, less intimidating. "Hi," she said to Lily, crouching down to the little girl's level. "I'm a friend of your dad's from work. What's your name?" "Lily. Are you Daddy's boss?" Jake winced. Kids had no filter, but Lara just smiled. "Something like that. That's a beautiful picture you're drawing. Is that your family?" Lily held up the paper proudly. It showed 3 figures, a small one with brown skin and black braids, a tall one with brown skin and a yellow circle in the sky. "That's me and Daddy, and that's the sun. Because Daddy says Mommy lives in the sky now and watches us." Jake's throat tightened. He hadn't realized Lily still thought about her mother that way. "That's lovely," Lara said softly. "Your daddy must tell you wonderful stories about her." Lily's face fell slightly. "Sometimes, but Daddy's always tired. He works a lot." She looked up at Jake with those big brown eyes that saw everything. "He doesn't play with me much anymore. He comes home and falls asleep on the couch." The silence that followed was suffocating. Jake wanted to defend himself, to explain that he worked so hard because he loved her, that every late shift and missed bedtime was for her future. But the words wouldn't come, because he knew Lily wasn't wrong. He'd been so focused on surviving that he'd stopped living, and his daughter was paying the price. Lara rose slowly, her expression unreadable. But Jake saw a weight settling in her eyes, a realization hitting home. She wasn't looking at a personnel file anymore. She was seeing the human cost of the system she'd inherited. "Lily," Jake said quietly, "can you go to your room and finish coloring? I need to talk to Ms. Wilson for a few minutes." His daughter gathered her crayons reluctantly, casting curious glances at Lara as she shuffled down the hall. When her door clicked shut, Jake turned to face the CEO of Wilson Enterprises. "You see it now?" he said. It wasn't a question. Lara nodded slowly. "I thought I understood before, reading my father's notes, looking at your file. But this is different." She gestured toward the hallway where Lily had disappeared. "She's real. This is real. And my company did this to you. What happens now?" Lara straightened, and Jake saw a flicker of the executive. She was the woman who ran a billion-dollar corporation, who made decisions that affected thousands of lives. "I want to promote you, Vice President of Operations. It's a new position created specifically to oversee warehouse logistics across all our facilities. The salary would be roughly 3 times what you're making now." Jake's head spun. Vice President? 3 times his salary. It was everything he'd dreamed of and never dared to hope for. "And Marcus?" he asked. "Fired. Effective immediately as soon as I can push it through." Lara's jaw tightened. "He's been manipulating personnel decisions for years. You're not the only one he buried, just the one my father happened to notice." Jake walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, thousands of people were going through what he'd gone through, working themselves to death for companies that saw them as disposable, being passed over, held down, told they weren't good enough until they believed it. "People will talk," he said without turning around. "They'll say I got promoted because you felt guilty, that I didn't earn it. Let them talk." Lara's voice was firm. "You've earned it 100 times over. The question is whether you're going to let other people's opinions stop you from taking what's rightfully yours." Jake turned to face her. "I need time to think." "Take all the time you need. This isn't a limited offer." But time, as Jake discovered, was a luxury he didn't have. 2 days later, word spread through the company that Marcus Reed had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. The official statement mentioned personnel irregularities. But everyone knew something bigger was happening. Marcus didn't go quietly. Within hours of his suspension, he'd scheduled a meeting with Helen Chambers, a longtime board member who represented the company's largest institutional shareholders. Jake only learned about this later, pieced together from rumors and whispered conversations. But the picture that emerged was clear enough. Marcus painted Lara as emotionally compromised, a grieving daughter, making irrational decisions based on her dead father's guilt. He positioned Jake's potential promotion as a PR stunt, a token gesture that would set a dangerous precedent. If the CEO started promoting warehouse workers to executive positions based on personal feelings, where would it end Helen, a pragmatic woman in her 60s who cared about quarterly earnings above all else, listened carefully. She didn't particularly like Marcus, few people did, but she liked instability even less. And Lara's sudden crusade for workplace justice threatened to upset a very profitable status quo. The board meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon, 9 days after Lara first appeared in Jake's apartment. Jake wasn't there, of course warehouse workers didn't attend board meetings, but Lara told him about it afterward. Helen had led the opposition. She'd brought charts showing projected stock impacts if news of executive restructuring leaked to the press. She'd raised concerns about shareholder confidence, about setting precedents, about the dangers of letting emotion drive corporate decisions. Lara had fought back with data of her own. Turnover costs, productivity metrics, the hidden expense of losing talented workers to competitors who actually valued them. She'd argued that what she was doing wasn't charity, it was good business. And Marcus, Helen had demanded, you're firing a COO with 15 years of experience because of some notes in your father's diary. Lara's response, as she recounted it to Jake, had been simple. I'm firing him because he lied, repeatedly, to HR, to my father, to me. If he'll lie about one employee's qualifications, how many others has he lied about? How much talent have we lost because Marcus Reed decided someone wasn't worth promoting? The meeting had ended in a stalemate. No formal vote was taken. But Helen made her position clear before leaving. If Lara went through with Marcus's termination and Jake's promotion, she would call an emergency shareholder meeting to discuss leadership confidence. In other words, Lara could lose her job. When she told Jake this sitting in his cramped living room while Lily slept down the hall, he felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. This woman barely knew him. They'd spoken only a handful of times, yet she was willing to risk everything she had for a principle. Why? The question came out rougher than he intended. Why would you do this? You could just let it go. Give me a smaller promotion, something that won't make waves. No one would blame you. Lara looked at him steadily. Because it's not just about you anymore. If I back down now, I'm sending a message to every Marcus Reed in my company that they can keep doing what they've always done. I'm telling every worker like you that the system will never change, so don't bother hoping. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. My father spent 30 years building this company. He was proud of it. But he also looked the other way when it was easier than fighting. He wrote in his notebook about the things he should have fixed, the people he should have helped, and then he died with all those good intentions, still just words on a page. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. I don't want to die like that. I don't want to leave behind a notebook full of regrets. If making this right costs me my position, then maybe I was never fit for the position in the first place. Jake sat in silence for a long moment. His whole life he'd believed that people with power only used it to protect themselves, that the rich stayed rich by stepping on people like him, that hoping for better was a fool's game. But here was this woman, privileged, white, wealthy, beyond anything he could imagine, ready to burn it all down because she'd read his name in her dead father's handwriting. Something broke loose inside Jake's chest. Something that had been frozen for years since Maria died and left him alone with a baby and a mountain of bills and a world that didn't seem to care whether he survived. He felt tears sliding down his cheeks before he realized he was crying. Not from sadness, not from anger, from something he barely recognized anymore. Hope. I'm sorry, he said, wiping his face with the back of his hand, embarrassed by the display. I don't know why Don't apologize. Lara's voice was gentle but firm. You've spent years being invisible, being taken for granted, Being told in 1,000 small ways that you don't matter. She reached out and touched his arm briefly, just a moment of human contact. You matter, Jake. Your daughter matters. And if I have to lose everything to make sure the world knows that, then at least I'll have done one thing worth doing. Jake looked at this woman he'd known for barely 2 weeks, this CEO who'd scrubbed his kitchen floor, and he realized something important. This wasn't about pity. It wasn't about white guilt or corporate PR. It was about two people from completely different worlds choosing to believe that things could be different, that the system didn't have to win, that sometimes, against all odds, justice was possible. Okay, he said finally, his voice hoarse but steady. I'll take the position. Not because you're offering it, not because I want to make trouble. He thought of Lily asleep in the next room, dreaming whatever dreams 7-year-olds dream. Because if I don't, I'm teaching my daughter that people like us should just accept what we're given. And I refuse to teach her that. Laura smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Then let's go change some things. The emergency shareholder meeting took place on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after Jake first found Lara Wilson kneeling on his kitchen floor. He wasn't invited. Of course, these decisions were made in boardrooms far above his pay grade, but Lara had promised to call him the moment it was over. Jake tried to work that day, but concentration was impossible. He moved through his warehouse shift like a ghost, lifting boxes and scanning barcodes, while his mind churned with possibilities. What if Lara lost? What if Helen Chambers convinced enough shareholders that stability mattered more than justice? What if everything went back to the way it was before, except now Jake would know exactly how much had been stolen from him? By noon, he couldn't take it anymore. He sat in the break room, his sandwich untouched, staring at his phone like it might explode. Deshawn dropped into the seat across from him again. You hear about the big meeting upstairs? Word is the CEO might get fired. Jake's stomach clenched. Where'd you hear that? Everybody's talking about it. Something about her promoting people she shouldn't be promoting. Deshawn shrugged. Corporate politics, man. Nothing to do with us. But it had everything to do with them. Jake wanted to tell him that. He wanted to explain that the meeting happening 20 floors above their heads would determine whether workers like them ever got a fair shot. But the words stuck in his throat because saying them out loud would mean admitting how much he'd invested in an outcome he couldn't control. His phone buzzed at 2:15, a text from Lara. 52% to 48%. We won. Call me when you can. Jake stared at the screen for a long moment, reading those words over and over until they finally sank in. They won. He excused himself and walked outside, standing in the loading dock where trucks came and went with their endless cargo. The air smelled like diesel and rain. His hands were shaking as he dialed Lara's number. She answered on the first ring. It was close. Too close. Helen pulled out every argument she could think of. Stock prices precedent shareholder confidence. Lara's voice was tired but triumphant. But I had the data. I showed them exactly how much money we've lost over the years from turnover, from burying talented workers, from letting people like Marcus run their little kingdoms. Some of them actually listened. And Marcus, gone. Security escorted him out an hour ago. He's already threatening to sue, but our legal team isn't worried. A note of grim satisfaction entered her voice. He spent 15 years building his reputation on other people's work. Now everyone knows it. Jake leaned against the concrete wall of the loading dock, his legs suddenly weak. It was really happening. After years of being invisible, of being told in 1,000 subtle ways that he didn't belong, someone had finally seen him. Someone had fought for him. So what happens now? He asked. Now we make it official. HR is processing your promotion paperwork as we speak. You'll start in the new position Monday. Lara's tone softened. How do you feel? Jake looked out at the parking lot, at the trucks and the forklifts and the workers who had no idea their lives were about to change. Terrified. he admitted. What if I'm not good enough? What if everyone was right about me? Jake. Lara's voice was firm. You've been doing the work of 3 people for years. You've trained half the workers in that warehouse. The only thing you've never had is the chance to show what you can do when someone actually supports you. She let that sink in before continuing. You're not getting this job because I feel guilty. You're getting it because you've already proven you can do it. The title is just catching up to reality. Jake allowed himself finally to believe her. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that follows a storm. Jake stood in front of his closet, staring at the one suit he owned, a dark blue number he'd bought for Maria's funeral 4 years ago. He'd lost weight since then, and the jacket hung loose on his shoulders, but it would have to do. Lily watched him from the doorway, her backpack already on for school. You look different, Daddy. Jake knelt down to her level, adjusting her braids the way Maria used to. Good different or bad different? Good different. Lily studied him with those serious brown eyes. You're smiling. You don't smile in the morning usually. The observation hit Jake harder than he expected. Had it really been that obvious? Had his daughter spent 4 years watching her father drag himself through life, too exhausted to show her the joy she deserved? Things are going to be different now, baby girl. He pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Daddy got a new job, a better job. That means I'll be home more. I'll have more time to play with you. Promise. Promise. He dropped Lily at school, then drove to Wilson Enterprises headquarters, not the warehouse entrance he'd used for years, but the main lobby with its marble floors and towering windows. The security guard gave him a visitor badge and directed him to the elevator bank. 17th floor executive suite. Jake's heart pounded as the elevator rose. Every floor that passed felt like another layer of his old life falling away. By the time the doors opened, he was a different person than the one who'd boarded. His new office was modest by executive standards, a glass-walled room with a view of the city skyline, but to Jake it might as well have been a palace. He stood in the doorway, taking it all in the mahogany desk, the leather chair, the nameplate that read, Jake Donovan, Vice President of Operations. His name, on a door. In a building where he'd spent years being nobody. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Jake turned to find a young black woman standing in the hallway, a tablet clutched to her chest. She looked nervous. Mr. Donovan, I'm Keisha, your administrative assistant. Ms. Wilson asked me to help you get settled. She hesitated. I just wanted to say a lot of us in the building we've heard about what happened, about how you got here. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. It gives us hope that maybe things can really change. Jake felt the weight of her words settle over him. He wasn't just taking this job for himself anymore. He was becoming proof that the system could be different, that talent and hard work could matter more than politics and prejudice. Thank you, Keisha, he said. I'm going to need all the help I can get. She smiled, and Jake realized that he had something he'd never had before in his career, a team that believed in him. He ran into Lara in the hallway that afternoon. She was coming out of a meeting, her expression tired but composed. When she saw Jake, her face warmed, not quite a smile, but something more genuine than her usual professional mask. How's the first day? She asked. Overwhelming. I've read more reports in 6 hours than I did in years at the warehouse. Lara nodded. It gets easier, or maybe you just get better at pretending it's easy. They stood in the hallway, these two people from opposite ends of the universe, and Jake realized how strange their relationship had become. She wasn't his friend exactly. She wasn't his boss, not in the way Marcus had been. She was something harder to define, an ally, maybe. Someone who had seen him at his lowest and chosen to lift him up instead of stepping over him. You know, Jake said slowly, I still don't fully understand why you did all this. You could have made a donation to charity. You could have created a scholarship fund. Something safe. Something that wouldn't have cost you anything. Lara considered the question. My father built this company from nothing. He used to tell me that a business is just people that profit without purpose, is just greed with better marketing. She looked out the window at the city below. I forgot that somewhere along the way. I got so caught up in quarterly reports and shareholder meetings that I stopped seeing the people who actually make this company work. She turned back to Jake. You reminded me. Your name in my father's notebook, the guilt in his handwriting, it reminded me that there's no point running a company if you lose your soul in the process. Jake nodded slowly. So we're even then. You gave me a chance I never would have gotten. I gave you a reason to remember why you started. Something like that. They shook hands, not the formal handshake of a CEO and her employee, but the grip of two people who understood each other in ways that transcended titles and salaries. That evening, Jake left work at 5:30. Not because he ran out of things to do, but because he'd made a promise to a 7-year-old girl who'd spent too many nights eating dinner alone. He picked up Lily from Mrs. Johnson's apartment, thanking the elderly woman for years of kindness he could never repay. Then he took his daughter home, and he cooked dinner while she did her homework at the kitchen table, something he hadn't done in longer than he wanted to admit. Daddy, Lily said between bites of spaghetti, are you happy now? Jake looked at his daughter, this small, perfect person he'd almost lost to exhaustion and despair. He looked around their apartment, still small, still modest, but somehow brighter than before. Yeah, baby girl, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I think I finally am. Later, after Lily was asleep, Jake stood at the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, thousands of people were going through what he'd gone through, working themselves to death, being passed over, being told they weren't enough. He couldn't save all of them. He knew that now. But he could save some. He could use his new position to make sure that talent got recognized, that hard work got rewarded, that nobody else had to spend years wondering why they weren't good enough. And maybe that was the point. Not to fix everything, but to fix what you could. Not to change the world, but to change your corner of it. Jake wiped his eyes and smiled. Tomorrow felt like something to look forward to. That was new. That was good. Sometimes the thing that breaks a man isn't pain, it's finally being seen, finally being valued, finally being treated like he matters. And sometimes that's exactly what saves him.